one more. And I had this idea that it would be really awesome to end this with a little something that we can do about birth trauma. You know, we're all wringing our hands about it and doing body work for babies and mamas for sure. But this is Alice Stroud, and she's an awesome practitioner. I can't think of anybody who has attended more free clinics. You have given more of your time to treat babies in Portland, and Alice lives in Eugene, so she has to drive a ways to get up here to treat these babies. But I know of no other former student who has spent so much time treating babies in this community, and so I really appreciate that. Alice has an education that I envy. She has studied with everybody, all kinds of amazing people who are experts on pre and perinatal psychology and all kinds of body work for babies and everything. And you're an IBCLC. Did you?
Just took the exam.
Yeah.
At the end of
She passed for sure. So anyway, take it away. Teach us something in an hour. You have less than an hour. You have 55 minutes. We're good.
All right.
That clock's a little fast.
Download.
Okay, the girl goes to the bathroom.
I am.
Do we need these extra chairs?
Well, I'll sit in one chair when I get back.
I just like that.
And you all know where I've been.
Yeah, I just on the wall, actually.
Squawk.
Yeah.
Alice, are you the energy shifter?
No.
No, that's Larry's.
Oh, this ball feels good. So, I've never done anything even remotely like this before in my entire life. And, but my whole life has been about healing birth trauma, really, starting with my own birth, which was, as was true for many of us, traumatic. Both because in our culture, most births are, and also because those of us who are drawn to this field, you know, I think that's a lot of what draws us here. Maybe we'll have a little show of hands. Who thinks their own birth is traumatic?
Their own, like us being born or our children?
Even our, what?
Us being born or our children? Which?
Us being born.
That's why I can hold my hand up. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see
Yeah, and it's also wonderful, and I noticed there are a few people who didn't raise their hand. It's also wonderful that there are some that have come in a clear, beautiful way that can have that gift to share. Whereas those of us who were traumatized, who, you know, more or less, I mean, it's a continuum, of course, have from that empathy for babies and for mothers, and also the passion makes a difference. So the main thing I want to accomplish in this hour is to tap into everybody's passion to go out and change the world. Because, I mean, we're already doing that, of course, in the work that we do. But if there's some little spark that I can ignite, as well as doing sharing some specific techniques, not really techniques, but tools and approaches. So I thought it would be good to start with a moment of silence. We can all close our eyes. Maybe not silence, maybe I'll focus into sort of a pause, a deepening. So suggest that people feel their feet on the floor, their seat, in whatever way helps you to become centered. Noticing your breath. And in doing this, I realize that I've been a little agitated, so I'm going to take a little moment to center myself. And there's been a lot packed into the just for now, seeing if we can let go of some of that. Just bringing ourselves to be more present in this moment. Maybe before opening your eyes, just kind of move around a little bit in the chair, move your hips, just whatever feels good. Maybe moving your shoulders, neck. All right, and when you're ready, open your eyes. All ready? So, I would like to make this experiential so that we all get a taste in our own bodies of some of what I'm talking about. I'd like to make it fun, and I'd like to make it informative. So, I'll say a little bit about my path. I was born in 47. My mother was knocked out. I think there may have been forceps, although she thinks there weren't, but of course she was knocked out, so she doesn't really know. And when I talk about birth trauma, I'm not just really talking, I'm using that as a shorthand for trauma through the whole conception, pregnancy, after birth. And birth is like a focal point where it kind of gets all focused in. So that even when a baby's born, the traumatic things that happen at the birth may be recapitulating the conception or the discovery. And so that the way the birth is interpreted by the baby, you know, such as they're trying to kill me, you know, they're trying to pull the baby out, or nobody wants me, or it's hopeless, or whatever, could actually have started earlier. Like if the conception wasn't wanted, and when the parents discovered they were pregnant, you know, there's all this, you know, I guess you're all familiar with all those different things that can go on. And in my own case, I had an experience recently with Elena Tonetti. How many people are familiar with her? She, Birth as We Know It was her wonderful, wonderful video. And she does 10-day-long trainings at birth shops, helping adults to heal their own birth trauma. So I had a very brief session with her. I did her 10-day training where I was feeling this panic, and she asked me where I was feeling it, and I said, here, and she put her hand here. And I've had so many previous experiences in my life of catharsis where, you know, cathartic regression work where you're supposed to like scream, struggle, and fight and all this stuff. But in this case, she just put her hand there and she said, what do you want to do? And she's like this amazing, totally loving, kind, totally friendly. And I just like that, and she just took her hand away, like, oh. And at that moment, I realized that my whole life has been based on this belief that the world is dangerous, they're trying to kill me or hurt me, nobody cares, nobody can help, and that it was actually a misunderstanding. They were trying to help me get out. So, and it's like, all of a sudden the wheels are like, wow, 64 years of that being my imprint, and it was just a misunderstanding. So sometimes these things can happen in a moment, these little shifts. But what it went back to was my, you know, prenatal experience. So, not sure I went to that one right away, but I guess one point I wanted to make about that is the moments that we sometimes share in these babies' lives can be really short. Like it might be one session. And this can happen not only in the actual sessions we do, but like anywhere, in the grocery store. That one moment of somebody actually seeing a baby and really acknowledging that can be this most amazing seed that's planted, even if they're in a family that's abusive. So anyway, the point is that we have amazing powers to change the world, and the world, as we all know, needs changing. I mean, it's, you know, the path of destruction that's happening, and needs these babies who are coming in, the ones who are coming in clear because they, you know, are not being traumatized, and the ones who've had trauma and who have been healed from that trauma. In fact, William Emerson is one of the people I studied with, who's one of the pioneers in working with babies. I like seeing babies. He's worked with thousands of babies, and he says that he would rather be with somebody who was traumatized and has healed their trauma than somebody who didn't have any, because there's a spiritual depth that comes from the wounding, you know, the concept of the wounded healer, and just this whole spirituality, the empathy, having been hurt and being empathized with really deepens one's ability to empathize with others. So there's the part where those of us who are working in the preventative field, you know, trying to help parents have better births, which includes prenatally helping the parents to heal their own earlier traumas, you know, to whatever extent we can do that. And after the birth, to help not only the babies but the mothers. And I assume that most of us work with mothers and babies in some fashion. Yeah, I mean, I think that's most of what we do. And it's interesting in this field, typically people work with babies or they work with adults healing their own birth trauma. And there's actually not that many people that I'm aware of working with parents after the birth, helping them to heal from the birth. In fact, birth trauma, the giving of birth trauma is so under-recognized in our culture because almost all hospital births are traumatic to some extent, and some home births. I'm a very strong home birth advocate myself. And it's very endemic to our culture, this whole, it's like if a culture wanted to produce people who will consume and buy things and follow their leaders blindly and go to war and, you know, abuse their children. If they wanted to create a horrible culture like the one we have, they would put into practice this kind of birth practices. So I don't know how much.
It is.
I mean, it's almost as if it was by design. And maybe to some extent it was. I sort of lost my train of thought on that one.
You were talking about William Emerson's statement about the wounded healer. Oh, that's not what he was going to say.
Yeah.
And people being willing to help adults with trauma.
Right, oh, that there's, yeah, this kind of separate fields, working with the babies working with adults to heal their own birth trauma as they were birthed. And kind of a missing piece is the working with the parents. And what I see that really needs to happen is working with the whole family, which Ray Castellino does that some in his book. And I trained with him also. And I totally recommend that people check out the whole APA, the birth psychology people, and they're having a conference in November. I've mostly come from identifying with the baby and kind of blaming the parents, because I always blame my own parents. You know, like, that's common, common thing that we tend to do.
You're right about that.
Yeah. So when I see parents, you know, like not getting it, what their kid is trying to say, there's this part of me that, you know, goes, well, what the fuck is the matter with you? You know, can't you see your baby is upset? And I have continued to evolve in my ability to realize that when anybody is treating somebody badly, it's because they've been hurt themselves. And actually, a really important part for me in getting that was that I took care of my parents for the last years of their lives. And I had a book called Taking Care of Parents Who Didn't Take Care of You, which is how I felt about what was going on. And the interesting thing was that I kept trying to take better care of my mother than she did of me. And I just couldn't. There was this wall. And then she actually died when I was gone, and it was my fault in some ways, and various things like that. And that was so, once I got through all the guilt, it was so healing to recognize that I wanted to love her, but I couldn't. And that's what these parents are feeling. You know, they want to love their babies, and they, you know, think they love them, and they love them to the best of their ability, but there's something that's blocking that. And I think that's a big part of what we can do. Have people seen the story of the weeping camel? Yes. So, yeah, I highly recommend that. It really helped me to see, there's this camel that has a difficult birth and rejects the baby. And the people trial these different things like tying them together, close together, and trying to get the baby to nurse. And what they finally end up doing is calling this kind of a shaman kind of guy who plays this string instrument, and he comes and plays that, and they even hang it on a camel's hump. And it's like somehow this gets through to her, and then there's this tear, that's the weeping camel part that comes out of her eye. And it's like, what that meant to me was that all along, because we are love, you know, that's what we're made of. And that love wants to get out, and the pain of not being able to let that love out. And that what it took was that community coming together, and this just beautiful ethereal music that let her, and then it was like as if she could see and feel her baby for the first time. And the baby, meanwhile, had been seemingly patient. You know, they've been feeding the baby with the bottle, and it wasn't like the baby was holding it against the mother or anything. So, I think that's really part of where I want to go with this, is that so many times we'll see babies crying and the parents are saying things like, "I'm okay," or various other ways of trying to stop the baby. And what's happening usually is that the crying is triggering something in the parents. So if we can somehow help the parents to notice what's happening in them, or even just empathize with the parent. Wow, it's hard to hear your baby cry. by talking directly to the baby. Like, that's really scary for you. I can see that's you're really scared, or whatever it is. And then empathizing with the parent, it'd be really hard to see a baby cry. And maybe throwing in a little education, like, it's hard to understand why the baby's crying. Just bend them. And it must be it's really difficult. And the education part would be something like, babies cry, they always have a reason they're crying. I mean, it may be because of something that's happening right now, but it may not be. It may be accumulated stress. It may be that position that the baby was just in there might have triggered the birth trauma. And what I always like to do is to get a history of the whole birth trauma, the whole birth, I mean. And ideally, if you're getting that, if the mother is talking about the birth, okay, this is the ideal scenario, is that you're watching both the mother and the baby, and the father's there too. Of course, that's a whole different piece. So you got to have like 3 sets of eyes. And when you notice that there's activation starting to happen, you can kind of slow things down and say, wow, I hear that this story is really a lot. There's really a lot, and I really want to hear it. And I wonder if you could just kind of pause there for a moment. So a lot of what I think healing comes through is telling the story with somebody really hearing the story. I mean, that's like one of the basic healing 101. And babies, of course, tell their story in a different way. And helping the parents to learn how to hear the baby's story. So, like, say the mother's telling the story and she gets to the part where the baby is stuck, and the baby starts to squirm or activate or something. You might pause. Let's pause here and, God, you're really stuck in there. And it's so amazing what that can do for the baby to hear somebody really getting it. And you may need to, like, ideally, maybe you'd have like more than one person. You wouldn't be doing this all yourself. Like, I know Ray Castellano works with, well, there's usually one person on the video camera, but then there's also two people. And if the parent needs more attention, then you focus the attention on the parent. And I realize that most of us are probably not working in situations where we can do this. Take a 3-hour period of time. And some of the parents may not be open to really dealing with their own stuff. But, we do what we can do. So, okay, maybe I'll go on to some of the actual things we can do with babies now. So, the basic model that I've gleaned from these different people, like William Emerson is pretty big on the cathartic part. And like I said, I used to do his workshops where we'd all be screaming. And the womb thing where they'd be like holding you down, not letting you out. Like the pressure cooker model of primal therapy. But things have evolved, and I think William's evolved since then too. I don't think he does that too much. But the basic idea is that you need to kind of touch into the trauma a little bit just to feel what it was like. But you don't need to stay there very long necessarily. And while you're in that, you need to feel acknowledged and seen and heard and empathized with. And that's where you were really stuck there part comes in. And I had a moment with William that was so healing. I was in one of these workshops, and I had gotten totally triggered into my terror of all people. And he was like trying to talk to me, and I was like, don't come anywhere near me, nobody come anywhere near me. And what he did was he just slowly backed off, kept in contact with me. And he got to, he wasn't quite that far, he probably wasn't that far away across the circle. And he said, wow, I really get how terrified you were. And you are. And it's like, I felt like, in some ways, I was seeing it for the first time in my life. And what it took for me to feel that safe was for him to be that far away. So, sometimes these babies, especially the ones who've had a lot of intrusion on them, especially the ones that have been in the NICU and various other things, what they actually need is more space. And they may be what they call tactily defensive. They may not want touch, they need to be farther away. But just to really connect and see the being that's there, and to know that they are a fully there being. And our culture so discounts that. It's like across the board everywhere. And they may not remember it in a cognitive fashion later, but it totally imprints them for their whole life. And if the baby has gone, okay, so there's the thing about resourcing, which is a really important thing in working with trauma, and the activation, like if a baby or anybody gets beyond a certain point of activation, they're like really getting into it, then they actually can't receive the empathy. They can't make eye contact, they can't hear you, they're just totally in their fear. And if that happens, you need to resource them somehow, and that might be by nursing, if they will nurse, some babies will. Being held by the parent. And all this is done with permission, with the baby's permission. Some babies may not want to be touched at all. And again, a lot of this is modeling to the parents, how that works. But, yeah, he doesn't want him to touch him, so I have to touch him. So, one of the things that William discovered was that when he was working with babies and they would just be screaming, and so one of the techniques is the birth simulating massage, where you can actually, this is one reason why the story is helpful, because if the baby was, say, forehead presentation or whatever presentation the baby was in, stuck. What?
That's a really
yeah. I know. That was the extreme. But in any of them, like just right here, and he calls it conjunct points and conjunct pathways. So if the baby is your typical left-sided lie, left occiput anterior presentation, the left side of their head up against the sacral promontory would be getting some extra pressure in there. And then as the baby, so there might be points. And William finds these by palpating at a distance. You can feel a difference. I never got that good at that myself. You can also see it a lot just from looking at the baby. And the other theory about this is that the head molding that happens, if their birth hasn't been traumatic in an emotional sense, then the molding will fill out within a day or two. If it doesn't come back out, that's a sign, seen as a sign that there's been trauma, that it kind of fixes it. So anyway, you'd expect to see or feel things on the left side and the left eye, you'd see things in the shape of the head. And then as the baby turns in the typical position, they'd be getting more pressure on the back and the forehead. So in the birth, what he calls birth stimulating massage, he would, let's see, this is the left side, be putting extra pressure on the left, and with not the same pressure as in a birth, but actually a fairly light pressure. And the baby, if the baby has been traumatized in that way, they will show emotion. A baby who hasn't been traumatized will experience it as pleasurable. So that's an indication. But if you start doing that and the baby starts to cry, if they're still present, then you can empathize, say, yeah, that was where you were in there, and, whatever. And if you don't know what the baby's feeling or where they're at, you can always just say, I really hear you, and I don't know exactly what's going on with you. I really, really hear you. It looks to me like you're scared. Maybe you're really mad. And it's fine to guess. And the baby will let you know if you get it. And if they're able to stay present, then a little bit of crying is okay. And you can continue. But if the baby is losing it and not staying present, it's a good idea to back off, either let off the pressure, or come off altogether, and do whatever you can to soothe. And of course, you're doing this with the parents, and the baby may be on the parent's lap or in the parent's arms, or however. And then maybe after the baby is calm, you might come back. And one of the things that William discovered in doing this was that some babies couldn't tolerate being touched without totally losing it. And so he started doing what he called desensitizing massage, where when the baby was in a relaxed state, like asleep, he would actually do really light touch, just so the baby could get used to being touched. So it's kind of like he'd back off to that. And also, so the other piece of it, there's the telling of the story with emotion and empathizing, and there's the repatterning. And repatterning also could be considered resourcing. It's like helping the baby or the adult to tap into the resources that they may not have had at the time. The simplest example, say, is a baby who was born by cesarean and they need to push, especially if it was an elective cesarean, so they didn't experience the pushing with their legs at all. And there's various ways that you can repattern that kind of thing. One is a position like this, so that they've got something to push against, and with maybe some light touch here, and just encouraging the baby to push. And for babies who haven't pushed at all, it may take a while. You may need to do something like, rub their feet to get them to help them feel their legs. It can also be done in a position, like coming down the birth canal like this. It might happen in your arms if the baby starts to turn, and just kind of following that and then giving them something to push with. It could happen, well, with an older baby, the baby could crawl through the mother's legs or through some kind of a simulated birth canal. And what I haven't seen other people doing that I think could be amazing is to help the baby and the mother repattern the birth at the same time. When babies may be like this, and the mother is maybe standing up. In fact, maybe we could also at this point. Some of us have babies, and if you don't, just imagine what you do.
You breach though.
Yeah.
What's your head down?
With your baby reach or. Yeah, so make sure you have enough room to move around a little bit, and
It's been a while.
okay, so back to the mama point of view now. I think that we all have in us just inherently the knowledge of how to birth a baby, whether we've done it or not, whether we've birthed in a different way. So let's take some time to just feel the earth with our feet and start to move. Maybe moving the hips in kind of a spiral. Because the birth is a spiraling process. And all this putting women flat on their back accommodates that spiral. And it's a powerful, the spiral is a really powerful move that we have. So in an actual session, if you were doing this with a mom and baby, you probably wouldn't hold the baby upside down for a long time. You'd wait till you were ready to actually do the birth. But, although babies might like it. Just really tuning into your power and feeling the power of birth. Feeling how the relaxes, when things open up, feeling the pelvic floor relax. And, you know, you can even imagine contractions. And I experienced a session like this in kind of repatterning my daughter's birth once. So just to have an experience of what this could feel like, feeling the baby coming down. So just to whatever extent works for you, you can really imagine this happening with you. Don't worry about what people think about what you look like. So that was an extremely brief example of the power that can happen by this. And anybody who wants to get down on the floor now, that's fine. I think I'm going to
Alice, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I didn't feel like I wanted to repattern that, and I didn't feel like doing the motions. I didn't. Is that normal too? Like I do?
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes,
So I'm just
yes,
making sure I'm
yes.
not like the abnormal.
Making sure you're
Yeah.
not.
Like I didn't want to repattern it. I'm like,
What?
Timing is everything, you know?
I'm
I
not
don't
normal.
want to change
I'm
it.
volunteering.
What did you say?
I'm not normal, and I'm volunteering. Love it.
Yeah, and you know, there are a lot of ways of doing these things. One of the new ones that I have just discovered, how many people are familiar with EFT? Yeah, I think most people. There's a new kind of offshoot of that called matrix reimprinting. Anybody familiar with that one? Which, it's kind of like the difference between primal therapy and, you know, gentle repattern. Anyway, the EFT helps tap down the feelings, you know. And matrix reimprinting not only does that, but then also repatterns. And anyway, the reason I brought it up then is because it doesn't involve doing any movement. You know?
But what if you don't feel like you want to repattern it because your
Oh.
experience has been positive and you don't want to even?
Oh, yeah, well, then there's no reason to, of course. Okay, I guess I was thinking every part of that had to be moved. Yeah, and actually, if somebody's had, and okay, here's another thing is that some births are probably traumatic from beginning to end, but most aren't. Most have some parts where you feel empowered, and maybe there's only one little thing you want to change. And maybe there's nothing you want to change, which is fine. But you can actually just kind of tweak that one little piece. Like with my son's birth, it was, I don't know, it felt like a rape, basically, what happened. But what I realized when I went to kind of work on it in a session was that the hardest part for me was that they took him away for 8 hours, 10 hours, I guess it was. And I thought, they said they had a room in the end, but it turned out it was only in the daytime. This was in But the repatterning I did was not to make it so they hadn't taken him away, but to make it so that I had support where I was in one part of the hospital, and he had support where he was, and that this love just went, you know. And when I did that, I just felt this whole new sense, and I talked to my son, and one thing I realized is that maybe I had always thought that he had felt abandoned that whole time, and maybe he didn't, you know, because maybe he actually felt my love. But, so with the matrix reimprinting, I think I'll say a little bit about that. I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but it's got a little bit of time, and I feel like this is a really important piece. They usually do it with all this tapping, but I really don't think it has anything to do with the tapping. I think it's more about the presence of another person, which is the crucial part of feeling anything. And basically what the practitioner would do is facilitate the person who wants to repattern something to see the scene of the birth as if you're looking outside of it, and then talk to the younger you and say, what would you like? And then you bring in resources. And this sounds like a really the first time I heard it, I thought, you don't think so? Yeah. So you can imagine bringing in these resources, whatever it is, it might be Superman, it might be your mother, or angels, and kind of rewriting it. But the really important part is that after you've got it so it feels good, you bring it into your body, into every cell of your body. And you really spend time doing that. You really feel all the love that's there, and you maybe flesh it out with colors or whatever makes it more vibrant for you. And you bring it into your heart. And then you send it out to the universe. And that's why they call it matrix reimprinting, is because you're sending out a new picture to the universe. And so that then when you think of this event, it's like you might know intellectually, I mean, of course you will, you'll still know what happened. You know, they took my baby away. But what you'll feel is different. You'll feel this love. And I actually did this with a traumatic 5th grade book report about public speaking. Which is why I can do this today. I gave this report about this little kid's book because I thought it would be easy, and this guy made fun of me, and I was totally humiliated and never stood up in front of anybody ever again. And when I redid it, I got the whole group up. It was about an airplane that talked. I got the whole group up, and we were flying around the room like airplanes. And the teacher said, it's not recess time yet, but since you're all having so much fun, you can have recess now. And we all went out and played, and that's what I remember. I mean, it's really amazing. And of course, you know, it doesn't, and Elena does a similar thing, Elena Tonetti, which without any of the tapping or anything, what she does is actually in a small group. You'll play like yourself, and you'll get somebody else to play your parents. And again, it involves acknowledging how it really happened, but then also redoing it, and to really take that in and really feel it, and that's what you remember. So that even though I was the only person in my chain of my matrilineal line who was born in a hospital, taking away all that, because I gave my birth my daughter at home, and she birthed hers at home, and my mother was born at home. I redid my birth so that I was born at home, and my mother had lots of support, and it's really changed how I feel about things. So, And I guess, you know, another thing I want to just really encourage people to do is to continue to notice when their own stuff comes up and to get help for moving through it. And we have that opportunity so much, you know? Whenever we're around a baby and a mother and a father, you know, whatever little pieces in us haven't been totally healed yet, we get an opportunity. And we can help and encourage the parents to do that too, to really, you know, notice what they feel when the baby's crying. And get support for themselves so that they can be present for their baby. So I'm trying to think right now if there are any other technique kinds of things. I mean, it's really simple, and it's stuff that we all know.
I heard you mention one in passing the other day that I'm very interested in. You were talking about an older child possibly an older child playing a game of like crawling through
right.
something.
Right.
I want to hear about that.
Yeah, and there are many other things you can do with older children. One of them is making different kinds of tunnels where they can crawl through. You know, you might start with one that's like huge and where you can see out. When my daughter was 6, I brought her and a friend who was also 6 to a workshop, and you know, because I wanted them to. And my daughter, who had a really basically not at all traumatic birth, just like loved going through the tunnel. Her friend, who was born by a C-section, kept popping up and freaking out, you know. And so, but you work with that, you know. You make them start with little steps, and then you keep going, and you know, increasingly you get to where you're making it tighter and tighter. And the babies and children will actually initiate, like say if the baby was pressing on this side, and you put your hands here, they'll actually start pushing into your hand right where it was. And a crawling baby will like want to go through the tunnel again, like they might the first time through or the first few times they might be like really scared and they just do it over and over. In fact, okay, well there was another one that Layman talked about, which was I think it was a 6-year-old girl who kept watching this video of a natural beautiful bird, and she had had a really traumatic birth herself, and she just by herself just kept watching this over and over again. She just back, rewind, however. And then one day I had watched it again, and she turned it off and she said, "That's how I was born." That's another example of an amazing way that healing can happen. And so yeah, to say more and answer your question more, you can also do things like with a sand tray or with, you know, toys and stuff. Like there was, in one of the videos I was going to try to show, it shows a girl who was actually setting up the whole hospital room the way it actually was, you know. And then what she did, she actually was taken away from her mother, but then after setting this all up, then she actually put the little baby on her. So.
And it was verified.
What?
That video you're talking about where everything's verified, the dad really was
Yeah, right.
standing over there by the mom.
Right.
Yeah, that was the coolest.
Yeah, and there's so many. I mean, there are adults who have regressed and just, you know, experience things, and then they find out later that that's how it was. Yeah. And I don't know. I think healing is an ongoing process. It seems. I mean, I'm still working on some of those little pieces.
I'm thinking about the fine line of how to keep, say a baby is spontaneously going into those motions, what do you look for and how do you kind of steer out of it if you feel like they're spiraling too quickly into like going into the pattern, trauma pattern? Because I'm just feeling like it's a fine line there, creating a healing experience or creating a re-traumatization experience. How do you, what would you say
Well, they're
about
probably
that?
not being re-traumatized when they're not crying.
No, well, if they start going into
Yeah,
Catharsis.
trauma place.
yeah, I guess, okay, because I was first imagining that they weren't crying, that they just kept doing it, but if they're crying and they're, yeah, I mean, I guess anytime they're crying in a way that you can't connect with them, bring them out of it. Is that?
Yeah, or even if they're not crying, like in this work, sometimes you can, the body will continue to do the same motion repeatedly, and we call that, they're actually just, again, over and over again, stating the trauma in a way. And so to gently but clearly guide the system to really evolve from that repetitive thing.
I would think that if they're doing that, well, one thought is that they might not get that you really get it yet. So you feel like you have to keep doing it. In which, you know, you might say, yeah, I see that's how it was, and you know, it doesn't have to be that way, or that's over, or maybe have it this way. And that's kind of like the offering another alternative, right? It was that way, but how about this way? Is there any other way?
Or how would you like it?
Yeah.
Huh?
It is I get that there's a line between, you know, reenactment over and over and over, and, you know, heading toward reenactment and finding resolution.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that actually happening that way. I mean, you know, you might say, yeah, you want to keep telling this way. Or, you know, just acknowledging what you're seeing. It looks like you want to keep doing that. You know? And then being curious, you know. Curious about that. How about if we try doing this way? Or, you know, you have choice. And I think a lot of it's about choice, you know, helping them to know that they have a choice. You know, in trying to get ready for this presentation, I spent hours and hours and hours trying to put together some video clips to show. I mean, you would not believe what I went through, all these machines that didn't work, and cords that didn't match up, and cord, you know, then
It's traumatizing.
So, right.
And then at home before I came up here Wednesday, and then also there, and when I finally discovered that I hadn't even brought the remote, so I couldn't finalize the DVD, so I couldn't show it anyway. And it was kind of like my birth, you know, I kept trying to get out that way, and it just kept not happening. And I experienced some session once where I just had this sense of some energetic hand saying, oh, there it is. You know? It was like I was trying to get out that way, but it was just a tiny little. So anyway, that might kind of work with that. You know, you keep going that way, but you just.
Have you ever experienced a baby who, when they are touching on their trauma, rather than going into that fight or flight, cry, they go into freeze? Because I think that that's, for me, where the line gets really, really thin.
Yeah.
Because a baby can be really complacent
Yeah.
and absolutely be in trauma.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure in my own self how to gauge that.
Yeah, I haven't personally experienced that. I guess what I would say is, yeah, I mean, to be aware of that is certainly important. And and with parents too, like a lot of times they think, oh, there's such a good baby, it doesn't cry, you know, whereas really that's good to check it out. You know, you might acknowledge that. It seems like this is very intensely kind of
So if they're in freeze, you just acknowledge that they're in freeze, and then you tune into the cranial rhythm and find out what's going on in the body, what's it feel like, and what's your connection with the baby. I mean, 'cause if you feel like you lost the connection with the baby and they're in freeze, then something happened, or maybe my awareness, or I wasn't present, or I wasn't centered. But it can be a nice place to be, because if they were in freeze, they're gonna go to freeze. We can't avoid freeze, but some people will consider it a shutdown too, but it's not always a shutdown, being in freeze, but so it's a normal physiologic process. So just recheck your connection with the baby and
I say to be very available for when they come out of that.
Yeah.
Very, very available.
you've got to hope you're available.
Yeah, you could even say that, you know, I
Yeah.
see these.
They're not getting more available at one point, but yeah.
You're really needing to withdraw, and that's okay, and and then, you know, you may need to look away too, it's like that maybe that it's too intense.
In working with older children, not babies, one of the techniques that we use, because I did a lot of work with my children, and that was a common thing that would happen, is the technique of going to their power source and literally activating them by circular, just circular motion, just not, it wasn't much, but enough to get them revved up so that they came back. And we really are revving them up. They're not liking because it's their power source, but they come back and then you're there for them. So I don't know for infants if, you know, if Carol's ever seen that or whatever, but that was one of the techniques that I learned.
A quick question. This work is so important to extrapolate onto, say, a lost breastfeeding experience, you know, a mother's nursing relationship that didn't go the way she wanted. Mothers really grieve that, and I think we often get focused on their birth. And then if breastfeeding didn't go the way they wanted, there's no grief support for them. But I'm curious about the component of sort of the repattering. I'll see a lot of moms prenatally who had just really a hard story with the first that didn't end the way they wanted to, and they're wanting prenatal breastfeeding support before they go through it again.
You saying this is their second?
Well, second, third, yeah, just another child where maybe their previous experience was so traumatic, they're wanting that support system in place beforehand. Do you think sort of that repatterning matrix work or whatever style they want to explore is best done with really a counselor, a therapist, or do you think it's something that a mom can be taught to do on her own, or do you think that might trigger too much, or is it different mom to mom?
Yeah, I mean, you can do any of these things by yourself, but also, I mean, it depends. It's basically the answer. Most of what turns out to be traumatic or experienced as traumatic is because there's not support, connection. And if somebody has a really strong sense of self, they can do it themselves. Or maybe they could do it with someone else first and then do it themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In general, I think.
In the presence of someone else.
And I found, you know, in that situation where I'm sitting down with a mom and she's saying, I want this experience to be different, you know, just to really let her talk that through. How do you want it to be different? You know, you know, let's talk about the kind of support system that you're going to set up the next time. And because I can't promise that woman that it'll be different. But what I also know is that she felt a total loss of control, and that's what she's really wanting, is that support and you know, different things helps create that sense of control, right? And sometimes just support that helps her feel like she's keep holding on to her own voice.
Yeah, and if you can, beyond that, help her to kind of make sense of the first birth, you know, integrate what happened, maybe do some repatterning on it. You know, beyond just the support, you can help them to be better. Yeah, the matrix re-imprinting, the woman she developed a further one called matrix birth re-imprinting, and she actually has worked with like a woman who their first giving birth experience was bad, and worked with them before the next one, and had amazing results, because you know, if that isn't healed, it's likely. some way. But yeah, I mean, we're all a work in progress. So I think I covered the main things I wanted to say.
We didn't do much hands-on work with each other during these 4 days, and I think it seems reasonable for us to make a little healing circle and maybe touch each other and see if we can put some of these mamas and babies in the middle of that circle. And by the way, anybody else who needs to be in there too, energetically, but if we can maybe have some hand-on. And people have some ideas about how you do this, like which hand is up and down, I forget how that goes, but some people know. And the sweaty one goes on the left. I don't know, well, we can do that. I don't know, I feel like sitting, I don't know. Standing's too hard.
Incorporate your
Left hand up.
right hand down.
Oh, I did it, see?
Circulate.
I'm a genius, I got it, okay. All right. Thank you. Woohoo, so. If anybody feels a little depleted, let us bring in some abundant energy that's all around us, deep in the earth, coming out of the sky, all around, and just fill up our tanks before we get ready to leave this wonderful, wonderful gathering that we've had. So let's just fill up our tanks till we're completely full, overflowing. I mean, really overflowing. Let's pass around the excess to our neighbors. And if you know any people who could also benefit from this, we can certainly place them in the middle of this circle and make sure that those folks get what they need to. If there's anything left after that, probably ought to give a little bit back to Mother Earth too while we're at it. Thank you everyone for being here and being part of this amazing event.
I'm gonna offer us all, it's a call and response, just four lines for the end of our day. It's, good evening.
Good